The dust settled like a shroud, fine and biting, clinging to Alara's sweat-soaked skin. Behind her lay the town, a collection of false fronts and cruel hearts, now just a smudge on the horizon. Before her stretched the empty land, vast and indifferent, promising nothing but thirst and the gnawing cold of the coming night. They had driven her out with stones and curses, their righteous fury a convenient cloak for their fear of the truth she had dared to speak aloud in the market square. The truth about the elders' corruption, the constable's brutality, the injustice woven into the fabric of their quiet lives. For that, she was marked, cast out. A woman alone with nothing but the tattered dress on her back and the weight of despair in her soul. Each step was a defiance, not against them anymore, but against the land itself, which seemed determined to reclaim her. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked. The sun beat down with a relentless malice, draining the last vestiges of strength from her weary limbs. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the baked earth, the impact jarring her bones. Tears, hot and futile, tracked paths through the grime on her cheeks. This was it, she thought. The end. Banished, broken, forgotten. The silence of the wilderness was absolute, save for the frantic pounding of her own heart and the ragged rasp of her breath. There was no mercy here, no softening edge, just the stark reality of stone and sun and endless space. She closed her eyes, picturing the faces twisted in hatred, the jeers that had followed her to the edge of town. They wanted her to vanish, to cease to exist, an inconvenient footnote in their carefully constructed lie. And perhaps the land would grant their wish. A coyote howled in the distance, a mournful, lonely sound that echoed the emptiness inside her. She pushed herself up, one trembling hand against the ground, forcing herself to stand. Survival was a raw, instinctual thing, a flickering ember refusing to be extinguished, even when the mind screamed surrender. She had to keep moving, find water, find shelter before the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert chill descended. It was a foolish hope, perhaps, but it was all she had left. The vastness of the landscape dwarfed her, making her insignificant, insignificant, a speck of dust in a world that cared nothing for her plight. Yet, as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, a different feeling stirred within her, not hope, not yet, but a stubborn refusal to let them win, to let this harsh, unforgiving land be her final resting place. It was a flicker of defiance, small but persistent, in the face of overwhelming odds. The wind picked up, a dry, cold breath that whispered through the sparse scrub brush, a reminder of the elements she now faced alone. Every muscle ached, every bone protested, but she forced herself to place one foot in front of the other, a slow, shuffling progress into the encroaching night. The image of the town receded further, losing its sharp edges, becoming less real than the immediate, pressing need for survival. She was no longer Alara, the woman who spoke truth to power. She was simply a creature seeking shelter, fighting for another breath, another heartbeat in the desolate expanse. Days blurred into a weary cycle of searching for water, finding meager sustenance, and sheltering from the sun and the cold night air. Alara moved with a quiet desperation, her initial despair hardening into a grim resolve. She learned to read the subtle signs of the land, the slight dip in the earth that might hold moisture, the shape of a rock formation offering a sliver of shade. Hunger and thirst were constant companions, dulling her senses but sharpening her focus on the immediate task of staying alive. It was on the third day, or perhaps the fourth, she lost track, that she stumbled upon a small, weathered cabin nestled in a protected hollow. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, a sign of human presence in this unforgiving solitude. Fear warred with a desperate hope. Who would be out here so far from anywhere? Cautiously, she approached, her movements slow and hesitant. A man emerged, tall and lean, silhouetted against the fading light. He was a stranger, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn hat, his posture still and watchful. He didn't speak, just observed her with an unnerving intensity. Alara stopped a safe distance away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, a silent plea in her eyes. He was Elias, she would learn later. A man who kept to himself, known in the distant settlements only as a skilled tracker and a man best left undisturbed. He had the stillness of the land in him, quiet and formidable. He didn't offer her a welcome, didn't ask her name, didn't inquire why a woman was alone and near collapse in this desolate place. Instead, he turned and went back inside the cabin. A moment later, the door opened again, and he placed a canteen and a tin plate holding a piece of dried meat on the porch steps. He didn't look at her, just retreated inside, closing the door softly. It was a lifeline, offered without a word, without judgment. Alara waited until the door was firmly shut before rushing forward, her hands trembling as she reached for the water. It was cool and clean, the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. She ate the meat slowly, savoring every bite. She didn't approach the cabin further that night, instead finding a sheltered spot among some rocks nearby. The warmth from the chimney a small comfort in the vast cold. The next morning, he was outside when she woke, chopping wood with rhythmic, powerful strokes. He glanced at her, a brief, unreadable look, before returning to his task. He left more food and water on the steps. This became the pattern. No questions, no conversations, just the quiet, unspoken provision of basic necessities. Alara watched him from a distance, observing his movements, his competence, his solitary existence. He seemed as much a part of the landscape as the rocks and the sky. She began to help in small ways, gathering dry brush for his fire, leaving it a respectful distance from the cabin. He never acknowledged her efforts directly, but the brush would be gone by morning. Slowly, a silent understanding formed between them, built not on words, but on shared presence and quiet acts of resilience and provision in a harsh world. Her initial fear of him lessened, replaced by a tentative gratitude and a growing sense of safety she hadn't felt since her banishment. She started to regain her strength, her body recovering from the ordeal, her spirit beginning to mend in the quiet solitude and the unspoken acceptance of this strange, silent man. Alara's strength returned, not just physically, but a deeper, more profound resilience rooted in the knowledge that she had survived the worst and was capable of enduring. She helped Elias with chores without being asked, finding a quiet satisfaction in contributing. She mended her torn dress, washed in the cold stream he showed her, and slowly, painstakingly, pieced herself back together. Her fear of him had evaporated, replaced by a quiet respect. She learned his habits, the way he moved with a predator's grace, the brief, almost imperceptible changes in his expression that spoke volumes he never uttered. He wasn't just surviving the wilderness. He was a part of it, attuned to its rhythms and dangers. One sweltering afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, raising a cloud of dust. Elias stopped his work, his body tensing, his gaze fixed on the approaching figure. There was something in his stillness that alerted Alara. This was not a casual visitor. As the rider drew closer, she recognized him. Jedediah, one of the men who had been most vocal during her banishment, a lackey of the corrupt elder. His presence here, so far from town, felt like a poisoned arrow aimed directly at her newly found peace. He reined in his horse a short distance from the cabin, his eyes sweeping over Alara with a cruel, triumphant glint before settling on Elias. "Well now, look what we have here," Jedediah sneered, dismounting. "Thought I smelled something foul out this way. Didn't expect to find you harboring the town's trash." Elias, his words were laced with malice. Elias remained silent, his stance widening almost imperceptibly. He didn't speak, but his presence was a clear warning. Jedediah took a step forward. "We know she's here. Brought word from the elder. Says he needs to retrieve something she stole. Probably that fancy locket she always wore." It was a lie, of course. They wanted her silenced, permanently, and perhaps whatever meager possessions she might have still clung to. Alara stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of Elias, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I stole nothing. You know why you banished me." For the truth, Jedediah laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "Truth is what the elder says it is, girl. And he says you're a thief and a troublemaker." "We came to collect." He took another step, reaching for the gun on his hip. In that instant, Elias moved, not with haste but with a fluid, deadly precision. His hand blurred, producing a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere. He didn't throw it, but held it ready, a silent, formidable threat. "Get on your horse." Elias's voice was low, gravelly, resonating with a quiet power that made Jedediah freeze. "And ride back the way you came." "Don't come back." Jedediah hesitated, his eyes flicking from the knife to Elias's unyielding face. He was alone, and Elias had a reputation. "This ain't over," Jedediah snarled, backing away slowly. "The elder won't forget this, Elias." He scrambled back onto his horse, casting one last venomous look at Alara before wheeling the animal around and galloping back the way he came. Alara watched him go, her heart pounding, but a surge of something else mixed with the fear. A fierce sense of protection, of being defended, and a realization of her own courage in stepping forward. The dust settled once more, but this time it felt different. The threat had receded, leaving behind a charged silence between Alara and Elias. He still held the knife, his eyes scanning the horizon, ensuring Jedediah was truly gone. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand, the knife disappearing as mysteriously as it had appeared. He looked at Alara, a long, steady gaze that seemed to see not the banished woman, but the one who stood before him now. He didn't praise her courage, didn't comment on the danger. He simply nodded, a small acknowledgement that spoke volumes. In that nod, Alara felt a profound shift. She was no longer the victim, the outcast. She was a survivor, capable and resilient, recognized not by the cruel judgment of a fearful town, but by the quiet, honest assessment of a man who lived by a different code. She had faced down her past, not with violence, but with unwavering truth, and found unexpected protection. She realized that her dignity hadn't been stolen when they banished her. It had remained within her, waiting for the chance to reassert itself. This desolate land, the site of her despair, had become the crucible of her transformation. Elias turned back to his work, the rhythm of his axe against what a familiar, comforting sound. Alara didn't know what the future held. Jedediah's threat lingered, a shadow on the edge of their newfound peace. But she no longer felt helpless. She had faced the emptiness, faced the cruelty of men, and found strength in unexpected places, in the quiet provision of a stranger, in the silent language of respect, and in her own refusal to be broken. She had been banished for speaking up, silenced and cast out, but in the wilderness, stripped of everything, she had found her voice again, not in words, but in the quiet assertion of her right to exist, to be. The redemption she sought wasn't in returning to the town or reclaiming her old life. It was here, in the crucible of hardship, forged in the shared silence and unspoken understanding with a man who saw her worth not in her past, but in her present resilience. She had lost everything, yet gained something invaluable. Herself. The harsh sun dipping below the horizon cast long shadows, painting the landscape in hues of orange and purple. It was still a hard land, unforgiving and vast, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a frontier, a place where a new life could be built, not on the shifting sands of public opinion, but on the solid rock of earned trust and quiet strength. Alara stood there, watching the colors deepen, a sense of peace settling over her that was deeper and more true than any she had ever known. She had been tested, refined, and though the scars remained, she was unbroken. And she was not alone.